Mr. Senior Minister, I was much relieved that there was not a fifth item on your list, which was to use a firing squad for investment bankers.
It's coming.
Coming. Well, first of all, I'm honored to be here, and I mean that with great sincerity. Having this particular celebration coincide with, for the class of '61, the beginnings of our celebration of our own 50th reunion makes this quite special. For those members of the class of '61 who are actually here in the audience, they know that I'm not at the podium because of my academic accomplishments at Williams. But rather, let me say, as was mentioned many times during the last day or so, I did take away from this great institution the idea of critical thinking, the idea of never to accept the status quo, the idea always to ask the question, what could we do better? I wonder if that's me.
I think it is.
It's with that it gives me great pride to say a few things about the Center for Development Economics. I think I must. We are, the class of '61, sharing this special occasion. And as many of you know, it is the tradition of the 50th reunion class at Williams to designate a particular activity, institution, subgroup at the college as the beneficiary of the class gift. Our class has chosen the Center for Development Economics to be the recipient of our gift. We have several other things, including public art, which many of us think is quite important around campus, but the main focus for us is the Center for Development Economics. And our idea, frankly, together with the visiting committee and a number of other important individual supporters, is to create an endowment for the Center for Development Economics, which will give it the ability to stand free as a part of the college. When we were here on campus, and I'll speak for myself personally, as an economics major, I was significantly influenced by Emile Dupre, by Kermit Gordon, by Bill Gates. I think in thinking of our own educational experience, it's really about that inspiration that comes from an individual professor, somebody who had a particular mark that made a difference. And it was these individuals who saw the importance of development economics and saw the idea of the center as something that they founded. And it's amazing to me that 50 years later, it is just as relevant, in fact, if not more relevant today than it was 50 years ago. And in the context of the college, as Williams itself thinks about its role in the global world, when I hear the ideas of privatization, globalization, liberalization, the challenge to this university, to this college, is to figure out where it is going to position itself in a global context, both for the students and for the future. And the Center for Development Economics is itself really a very interesting and unique activity on the campus. And the undergraduate students are more and more interacting with the CDE students and vice versa. It has now become really an integral part of the college, and therefore we, the class of '61, are particularly proud to commit to this endowment. A part of my, I think, journey to Asia, again, goes back to the experience here on Williams College. The curiosity that I received here after 25 years in Wall Street led me to Tokyo in 1987, as Jerry said, to Hong Kong in 1992. And it was that curiosity that really made quite a difference to Susie and me, my wife, in a career that I would say, was really accentuated in terms of my own satisfaction of the 15 years in Asia. Let me now quickly get back on the agenda, and what I want to do is mention 5 lessons, and these are lessons that come from a practitioner, not a government official, not an academic. And let me start with the crisis of 1997-98. The first thing I'd like to mention, on July 1st, 1997, I was in Hong Kong, and that was the first day that the government of Hong Kong was in charge of Hong Kong. The British government handed them the reins in Hong Kong on June 30th, 1997. And on July 1st, the Thai baht was cut loose and the crisis of 1997 began. So as I think about my experience in Hong Kong, that government never had an opportunity to govern under normal circumstances. From the first day they walked into the office, they were faced with a crisis. And that leads me just to make a comment on currency. I think one of the things that we learned more than anything else from that experience is to free a currency to trade on capital account too soon is one of the biggest mistakes a country can make. And we saw that impact on Malaysia, on Thailand, on Indonesia, and eventually on Korea. The second point I'd like to make is about leadership. I don't think there has been enough said in the last day or so about the importance, the critical importance of leadership and the role it plays, both in institutions, in governments, in academic institutions. In the fall of 1998, I was quoted in Business Week in response to the question, what are you worried about in Asia? And I said, well, just to take 2 countries, I really am worried about Korea because they have an election coming up. It's not clear who's going to run the country. I'm quite confident that Indonesia will be all right because it has very strong leadership. 2 months later, I was absolutely wrong on both accounts. Suharto got thrown out, and Kim Dae-jung came into Korea and provided the change in the leadership that made that country solid. 2 really important lessons to me. The third point is what kind of economies worked during that period of time. And it's quite curious, as I looked at, and the senior minister was saying, what happened to GNP and other factors in the economy, the economies of Asia. The 2 countries that performed the best during that period of time were Australia and China. For completely opposite reasons. China held the course on its currency. It had a command economy. It was able to stand really outside the crisis. And on the other hand, Australia, which has one of the most efficient markets in Asia, a very efficient currency market, was able to withstand through its institutions, through its regulation, and through the way the market worked, the crisis. So it's not to say, and I think it's been said many times today, there's no one suit that fits all, and that to me was one of the greatest examples. During that period of time, I had a planning session in Hong Kong, and I asked a man who was at that time, very importantly, a mentor of mine. Many of you probably know him, Lord Gordon Richardson, who was formerly governor of the Bank of England and was then chairman of Morgan Stanley International, to come to Hong Kong and give us a dinner talk on the subject of planning for the unknown. And Gordon, as he so often was wont to do, said to me about 5 minutes before his talk, having made no preparation for it, "This is the craziest subject I've ever been given. There is no answer." But then he proceeded brilliantly to talk for 15 minutes, and at the end he said 2 things. Know your counterparties and never get too leveraged. And if there is any message that was more important to guide our strategy in Asia, it was those 2 things. And I would say we should have all remembered those 2 things during the last 2 years. Finally, a couple of things about China, and then I will conclude. There's some charts outside, and I encourage all of you to take one home. I'm not going to put them on the screen, and I didn't want to have them passed out, but they're, again, 5 points. The first point I call a brief history of the world. And what it shows, which I think we should always remember, is that and this is fairly sketchy data, but I think it's the best around. In 1500, China was 25% of global GDP, India was 24%, and Western Europe was 18%. The United States obviously didn't make the chart. You come down to 1950, Western Europe 26, the United States 27, China 4.5. As recently as 1820, China was 33%, and India was 16%. And what this says to me is that the perspective that we, particularly in America, have, which is a relatively short-term view of history, is not shared by China. There are 5,000 years of experience, and just in the last 500 years, China has been in leading positions from an economic point of view many times. That says to me that if they continue to do what they're doing, they will, again, be a leading economic nation. The second chart is about consumption. Everybody talks about consumption in China. Will it happen? Will that become a part of the economy? Our experts believe that it will, and if it does, that will really change the equation for the world, and there are many, many arguments in favor of why that will happen. The third chart is about the foreign exchange rate. Already the yuan has appreciated from about 8.2 in 2000 to what yesterday was around 6.7 to the dollar. There's tremendous pressure from the United States, now the IMF, to move the currency up more. I think there is a great debate going on in the world, really, about currency rates now. But I would encourage all of you to understand that China has read history, and it understands probably better than any nation ever has the risk of freeing up your currency too soon. And I think, therefore, they will not bow to pressure from anybody to make that mistake. The fourth chart is about their financial institutions, and we've talked a lot about financial institutions, and let me just say that as of last week, among the 8 largest financial institutions in the world by market capitalization, the 4 big Chinese banks are on that list. This is not a mistake. It's because they have made their banks strong. They're well capitalized. They have good business models. And 5 years ago, it was not obvious that they would make it, but they have. And I think they will be important global players, and it's an important element in the strength of the Chinese economy. The final point I'd like to make is about their stock market. The Shenzhen, Shanghai stock markets are capitalized at $3 trillion as of last week. The New York Stock Exchange is capitalized at $17 trillion. The average daily trading volume in in China was $23 billion a day. In New York, it was $27 billion a day. And this is a stock market that is totally domestic. There are no institutions. It is a market that has the benefit of no cross-border capital flows. And what this says to me about Shanghai, which is really the center of the Chinese capital markets, is that it will emerge as the leading financial center in Asia once the renminbi is convertible on capital account. And I think it probably has a shot at being one of the leading financial centers of the world. So let me conclude in the following way. Progress or regress are both products of the actors and the practitioners in a dynamic system. All are critical and all spring from experiences like Williams and the CDE, and in my case, the University of Chicago. Emile Dupre, Kermit Gordon, Bill Gates inspired all of those who had a chance to learn from them, and the world, for me, became a passion to use the idea of finance to make the world a better place. In 1963, investment bankers were actually at the center of the capital market, acting as intermediaries to move capital from the holders of capital to those who needed it. I want to end with two stories. We created an investment bank in China called China International Capital Corporation, which is today the leading investment bank in China. And my counterpart across the table was Wang Qishan, who is now the vice premier in charge of the economy. He was then president of the China Construction Bank. He said to me that there are two ways to get an idea across. One is to use theory, and the other is to tell a story. He said Chinese officials much prefer stories. So I went into the world after the GSB convinced that the capital markets were really at the center of the market economy, and that the role that they were supposed to function, that they were supposed to provide, was to supply the capital to fuel the growth of the economy. When I left the industry in 2001, retired from Hong Kong and came back to San Francisco, that function was still the same. In the last 9 years, the financial community got off track. Institutions, as Joe Stiglitz said last night, need to be moral. I'm not so sure that there is such a thing as a moral or immoral institution, but I am sure that there are individuals who are moral or immoral. And the society, in my view, has licensed the financial institutions to perform the critical intermediary function that is at the center of the economy. Here are the two stories. I act as an advisor to the Chinese government with 10 other individuals from around the world, and we meet once a year with the CSRC, which is the Chinese SEC. At the meeting in September of 2009, Shang Fulin, who is the chairman of the CSRC, opened the meeting by looking down the table at John Thornton, who is the retired co-president of Goldman Sachs, and me. And he said, in front of 80 or so people convened in the room, "We have an old Chinese saying that even the best professors become better if they are able to learn from their mistakes." Second, he said, "How does it feel to be here representing a socialist country?" And then he said, "What do you think the business models of Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley will be in 5 years?" That was a very prophetic and important question. My closing thoughts are, the socialist market economy, which is what the Chinese refer to their economy, is capitalism. And secondly, China studies history and learns from history, and that to me ensures their future. Thank you very much.